Benchmarks cheer US Federal Reserve's decision to cut rates by 50 basis points. They did end flat after hitting record highs intraday. Well, can the rate cut by the US Fed trigger a rate-cutting cycle by other central banks? Hong Kong Central Bank cuts rates after 4 years, and all eyes are on the Bank of Japan and the Bank of England's decision. Vodafone plummets 15% as the Supreme Court rejects pleas by telecom companies seeking recalculation of dues owed to the government. Labour Ministry probes death of a 26-year-old chartered accountant, says it will look into the mother's allegation of an unsafe and exploitative work environment at EY. Canada cuts international study and work permits. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says there will be a 35% fewer international student permits this year. New wave of explosions in Lebanon kill 20 and injure over 450 people as thousands of walkie-talkies explode in Hezbollah units across the country. And the British rock band Coldplay announces its India performance as a part of the music of the Spears World Tour in 2025. The Hymn for the Weekend artist will be back in the country after 9 years. Good evening and welcome. You're watching Profit 360 on NDTV Profit, and I'm Nupur Talwar Suri. The markets, of course, did hit record highs at open and closed higher despite pairing some of those gains as financial stocks provided support. Now, Harsh is joining us right now for a look at all the action that took place on the Lal Street. Harsh, take us through what's happened.
Well, the Nifty 50 closed and went home with some gains in trade today, but that's hardly the reflection of what's happened in the overall market. So don't go by that number. 0.2% higher on the Nifty 50 and largely led by banks, 0.5% higher. Let's pull up the heat map, at least on the Nifty. Let's see which ones or which stocks essentially were gainers because the breadth of the market was weak, even though some recovery in the latter half of today. NTPC up around 2.4%, largely seeing traction because of NTPC Green's IPO getting a bit of a leg up. But you're seeing good traction both in FMCG as well as in banks. That's essentially what ruled the roost today. Auto also saw some good traction, Maruti, Bajaj, Hero among some of the gainers. In terms of the losers, well, you'll see more of the likes of a BPCL, Coal India, ONGC, more of power along with IT. That's what was the flavor in terms of the loser. Let's pull up the contributories for the day. RIL also contributing around 0.5% odd in terms of gains. Well, HDFC Bank, second day in a row, the top contributor on the Nifty, but along with it, NTPC, Kotak and Bharti also chipping in. L&T, TCS were some of the losers, along with BPCL and Coal India in terms of contributories. Let's last off start looking at where the broader markets were. The advanced decline ratio, first off, to give us an indication as to how that played out pretty much through the day. Well, gaping in terms of the difference, 3:1 in favor of the declines. Let's also pull up where the mid-cap and the small-cap indices have closed in at. 0.5% lower on the Nifty mid-cap. The small-cap too saw some bit of selling, 1% odd lower. But if we pull up the intraday chart for the Nifty mid-cap, we saw a bit of a recovery towards the end of the day, which kind of leaves some bit of positivity, at least in trade. There you go, that recovery that you see towards the fag end. Last off, let's pull up the BSE 500 before we close it with some sectors. There you go. Those are some top gainers, losers. Vodafone Indus had their reasons of buzzing. IIFL lower as well. In terms of gainers, KPR, Rainbow Medical. You also had Century Textiles doing well in trade. Let's last off pull off sectors. Try and see which ones were buzzing. And banks did well. Of course, we spoke about that. But outside of that, we also saw some traction in realty, auto did well as well. Pharma, metals, PSU Bank and media were quite beaten in trade.
All right, now the Federal Reserve's decision to lower rates is expected to have a significant global repercussions. Now, experts on NDTV Profit explored the implications of the decision, particularly for India and other emerging markets.
What you're going to see is emerging market rate cutting cycles broadening and picking up steam again. And so we're looking for many of these EMs to see scope to start cutting rates again without having to worry about those factors with the exchange rate inflows. And that includes EMs in Asia, where rate cuts have not really gotten started. But I think now that the Fed has started to move, that will open up scope for those economies to ease as well. So I think the Fed's move for EM means that some of those rate cutting cycles can start up again, and new rate cutting cycles can start as well.
It may not find its way immediately, right? There's going to be a recalibration based on what the Fed has just done, what the Fed's going to do, how that's going to impact the dollar, and then how it's going to impact the EM markets, right? The emerging markets, whether it's India, whether it's the other EM countries, and what they do with their rates. And so I think we're going to have to watch and see how that happens. I don't think it's going to happen quickly or immediately. And to your point, a weaker dollar is going to make your products more expensive. And so therefore, if they don't bring that in line, then that differential is going to stick way out. Is going to be probably a hindrance or a headwind to new money coming in. But if India and the other EM nations come down, they start to keep the differential the same, and so therefore there doesn't end up being a big difference. Then I think yes, there's more of a possibility that opportunity and money will come into places like India, which are very, very hot and actually very exciting at the moment in terms of opportunity and what's going on there in your markets, in your sectors.
If you go back all the way to Paul Volcker, and if you see, the kind of economy and the interest rate environment that was there until now, any quote-unquote recession that has been Fed-led, and this is what the Fed is trying to do, it's trying to cool down the economy by raising rates, has been very shallow and short-lived. So I don't think people are going to be too fussed about this entire rate cut cycle in the US. The only thing is, what could it mean for India? My sense is this will put a little bit of pressure on the Reserve Bank of India. I think they'll have to move their stance to neutral in the next meeting that they have. And we were forecasting our first rate cut in India in February of next year. That may get probably advanced to maybe December's meeting this year. So I think all things considered, even that we're expecting just about a 25 basis point. But I think the market will digest this and move on. Like I said, I think it's a culmination of sort of maybe being a little behind the curve and probably not being able to do another one before the election. So I think all things considered, we're okay.
Well, but could the decision by the US Fed Reserve trigger rate cuts globally? Now, Hong Kong's central bank, the Hong Kong Monetary Authority, lowered its interest rates after 4 years by 0.5%. The Bank of Japan's decision is due tomorrow. And the Bank of England's rate decision, which is due later today, will also be very closely watched. Now, the Bank of England, of course, is set to maintain the policy rate at 5% compared to the Fed's new range of 4.75 to 5% after the cut. Well, moving on to the other big story we're tracking today. Now, the Supreme Court has rejected the plea of telecom operators seeking a recalculation of their AGR dues. AGR refers to the revenue earned by these companies from spectrum and other non-telecom revenues. Now, the Chief Justice of India rejected the curative plea filed by Vodafone Idea, Bharti Airtel and various other telecos. And Varun Gakar is reporting on this and joins us now. Varun, huge blow coming in for these telecom companies. Take us through what happened in court.
That's right. So big setback for the telcos such as Vodafone Idea, Bharti Airtel, as the top court has rejected their curative pleas that were filed against top court judgment which came out in 2019 that held that while calculating these AGR dues, all these telcos will have to include their non-core revenues as well. Now, telecom operators had filed their curative petitions based on the premise that the Department of Telecommunications had made a grave error in the calculation of the AGR dues, and on top of that, the top court had imposed an arbitrary penalty on these telcos. Now, the curative plea was taken up by a 3-judge bench led by the Chief Justice of India, D.Y. Chandrachud, on August 30 this year, and the order was made privy to us only in the morning. Now, let's understand what AGR is. AGR is basically a revenue sharing mechanism between the telecom operators and between the Department of Telecommunications. Now, under this mechanism, the operators have to pay a certain spectrum usage fee and a licensing fee to the Department of Telecommunications. Now, how the DOT calculates this fee is by calculating it as a percentage of the AGR. However, what constituted AGR was under dispute since 2005. Now, in October 2019, the top court ended this 14-year-long battle and held that while calculating these AGR dues, the telcos will have to include the non-core revenues as well. Now, the 2019 judgment was a big blow to all these telcos, and specifically Vodafone Idea and Bharti Airtel were staring at dues worth more than 1 lakh crore. Now, since the curatives have been rejected, this seems like a final nail in the coffin in as much as any reconsideration in the AGR dues case is concerned.
Varun, thank you very much for joining us with all those details. Now, how much of a hit would Vodafone and Bharti Airtel take on the back of this judgment? Rucha Samaya from NDTV Profit joins in with a report.
What are AGR dues? Well, these are the dues which are paid by the telecom companies to the government in return of using their spectrum license. Now, government calculates this on the basis of total revenue, which includes revenue from telecom as well as non-telecom business. However, the telecom companies were really upset about this fact, and they said that only revenue from telecom business should be included while calculating these dues. And then they filed various petition and plea against this kind of move by the government to various authorities, and the latest plea filed by Vodafone Idea was in October 23, and today the Supreme Court has rejected that plea and said that the telecom companies are required to pay the AGR dues. But then we'll move on to the quantum of dues which are payable by Vodafone Idea, Bharti Airtel and Reliance Jio as well. But starting with Vodafone Idea, now it owes around 70,300 crore of dues to the government. Bharti Airtel owes around 44,000 crore dues. Well, there's no major dues payable by Reliance Jio because it started in 2016 and has already paid their dues to the government. Now, moving on to the kind of cash that is lying on the balance sheet of these telecom companies, if we can move on to showing the cash, we'll see that Vodafone Idea has around 535 crore of cash and Bharti Airtel has 16,340 crore of cash. So a huge sort of asset liability mismatch is seen over here, but Bharti Airtel has lower dues than Vodafone Idea and higher sort of cash balance. So Bharti Airtel is better positioned than Vodafone Idea, and Vodafone will be hit the most because of the rejection of plea by the Supreme Court. But then let's look at the kind of timeline going back in 2005 and 6 when all this started, where government took the decision of how AGR should be calculated, and the telecom companies were upset, and then in 2019, these telecom companies had filed a plea against this kind of decision taken by the government. And even moving ahead in 2020 and 21, telecom companies, filed the plea, but then it was rejected, and Bharti Airtel paid about 18,000 crore of dues, and Vodafone Idea paid about 7,800 crore of dues to the government. But as I rightly mentioned, in October 23, Vodafone again filed a plea which was rejected by the Supreme Court today. So all in all, just concluding, number one is that telecom companies will have to pay these dues to the government, and number two is that Vodafone Idea will be hit the most because of its huge asset liability mismatch over here.
All right, Rucha, thank you very much for that. And joining us for more on this is our Satyan N. Gupta. He's the ex-principal advisor at TRI, and H.P. Ranina. He's a lawyer at the Supreme Court. Good evening, both of you. Thank you very much for joining in. Mr. Gupta, to you first. Mr. Gupta, this is a huge blow to both Vodafone and Airtel, but more so for Vodafone. It is already besieged by a lot of financial trouble. Now, this essentially could sound the death knell for them.
Not exactly, Nupur. Yes, it is a big blow for them who are already under big stress. But this actually, if it is wrong or if it is injustice, it can be undone also. Though the Supreme Court have rejected the plea itself, but actually in India we have two pillars of what we call democracy: the judiciary, which is supreme, and then the government. Actually, government can also help if they are convinced that there is something injustice is being done. If you remember Justice Bhagwati, the old Chief Justice, in one judgment he told to a lawyer, that gentleman, this is a court of law, not court of justice. So Supreme Court have done whatever they could do as per the law. But there is a concept called natural justice. The natural justice can be actually, you can say, implemented or can be used by the government through different means. If government believes that there is an error, there is an arithmetic calculation error which is genuine, actually there is a saying called EOE, error and omission accepted. And that is a famous actually clause which is used in most of the invoices. Even the government invoices also normally have that. So if that is the case, the government suo moto actually can have a relook on the calculations. They can make use of some experts. They can make use of some independent accountant, independent auditors, and they can have a look on the calculations. And if it is found there was a genuine mistake under EOE, they can actually suo moto return the overpayment made by these telcos. So it is not against the law.
Mr. Gupta, you still believe that there could be a way out for these companies, particularly Vodafone, because, in case this hit is too hard for them to digest, we could be creating a duopoly sort of a situation. I'm going to go across to Mr. Ranina on this one. Now, obviously, legally, this marks an end of the road as far as the AGR dues bit is concerned. But as Mr. Gupta was pointing out, do you think that the government may now, look at perhaps an intervention from their side?
Yeah, Nupur, I think Mr. Gupta is right. But if they make a recalculation, that recalculation will have to be made for all the telecom companies, not only for Vodafone. So it is entirely the choice of the government to give some relief if they so wish, but then it will benefit everybody else. But they have a 10-year period to pay the amount. And ultimately, Vodafone was aware of this. And as I was interviewed last year, I mentioned that there is no point in going for a curative petition because there's nothing wrong or illegal which the Supreme Court has done. And therefore, the petition was bound to be rejected. Therefore, they were aware of the consequences. Merely going on a curative petition doesn't help them. But they will now have to get the money. If they don't have the money, as has been pointed out earlier, and Vodafone UK or Netherlands will have to bring in the money as a promoter and pay the dues. There is no other solution. They will have to pay. There may be some relief in terms of recalculation, but that's a separate issue. Whatever is the amount finally decided will have to be paid.
Right, Mr. Ranina, so as you're pointing out, even if there's some relief in terms of recalculation, it won't be a very huge amount. So as far as the dues remain right now, and they're about 70,300 crore rupees for Vodafone in particular, those will have to be paid. Is that correct?
Right, absolutely right. There's no way you can get away with it. So the promoters will have to bring in funds if they don't have enough money. That's the only solution.
All right, Mr. Gupta, coming back to you now, how do you see this impacting Vodafone's debt-raising plans since, that debt fundraise was going to be very crucial for the company's survival itself?
No, Nupur, actually it will not. It is not new as our lawyer friend have told. It was known. It was known to the institution. It was known to the banks also. And everything has been disclosed by Vodafone. So it is not anything surprise to the lender or to the investors. That is for sure. But I will still say there is a way out. There is something called law of arbitration. Actually, sometimes the bilateral, like here, the government and the operators, or one operator, any operator who have really a strong case, so they can go for arbitration also, actually, which can run parallel to the judicial process. And I've seen a lot of arbitration cases decided actually as per the fact, as per the natural justice, as I mentioned, and there is a way out. And the volume, as far as Voda is concerned, actually is quite high when they have made the plea, actually. It's quite high. It will be a big relief because the total 70,000 crore need not to be paid, as our friend lawyer also mentioned, in one go. It is in 10 annual installments. So if they can get relief equivalent to one installment or two installments, so that can also delay their struggle and their stress.
Perhaps could be looking to buy more time, and we'll be hopeful that the government will be kind enough to allow for that. Both of you, thank you very much for joining us on the broadcast.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Nupur.
All right, now gold has been hitting new records of late. We caught up with Titan MD CK Venkataraman about the demand for the precious metal, especially with the festive season round the corner. Here's an exclusive interview.
I think the joy of shopping in a store is getting stronger and stronger, and even in the smallest of towns where we're setting up stores, we're finding that people are really loving that, and I think that's having a cascading effect across all categories.
Absolutely. And when you're talking about store expansion, we're seeing a lot of competition around. So how is that playing up?
So both in our own categories as well as every other category, I think the organizing of every industry is happening,
right,
because I think the customer experience is given mostly through that kind of a professionalizing of the network of the stores and all that. And even the local players, the regional players in every category are actually totally sprucing up their customer value proposition, and that's what we are seeing on the ground. I think maybe even the definition of organized versus unorganized, we may need to sort of think about. What I mean by that is that there are, for example, if I were to take jewelry, there are independent jewelers who are a single city based, who you may end up calling as organized, but they're quite, you may end up calling them unorganized because they're not part of a national chain or a regional chain, but they're very professional in their overall customer value proposition. So I do feel, depending on the industry, all ethnic categories, if I were to take food retail, jewelry, ethnic Indian wear for women, so these are local in nature. These can become very organized but still remain local in ownership, or at state level, for example, need not be dominated by national chains. Whereas product categories which are pan-India in nature, I think the scale advantages of a national player will start to play. But overall organizing is happening because the customers are wanting a certain minimum standard in the shopping experience.
Well, on to another NDTV Profit exclusive. Sources tell us that IIFL Finance may see a rating downgrade soon. Now, this may be due to a delay from the company to remove the RBI restrictions on its gold loan business. Vishwanath Nair is back with us to give us more details on the story. In fact, he's joining us.
So what sources are telling NDTV Profit is that IIFL Finance might see a credit rating downgrade simply because of the delays in RBI lifting its restrictions on the company. Now, if you remember back in March, the Reserve Bank of India had placed severe business restrictions on IIFL Finance, where IIFL Finance was not allowed to lend against any gold ornaments. That restriction has not yet been lifted off of the company, and that's probably why rating agencies will look at downgrading IIFL Finance's rating from AA to AA minus, and this will be a big problem for an NBFC like IIFL Finance, simply because all kinds of borrowings that an NBFC does are linked to the credit rating that is assigned to it. So if a credit rating downgrade happens, that makes the borrowing cost significantly higher for any of these companies. Apart from the issues with respect to cost of funds, what IIFL Finance will also be forced to do is lay off some of its employees. Remember that IIFL Finance has over 39,000 employees spread across 2,775 branches. And in each of these branches, roughly 4 or 5 employees belong to the gold loan division. So if the business does not grow significantly and if RBI restrictions continue, then the company will be forced to lay off employees from this division.
Well, in fact, Vishy, do stay with us, and let's shift gears to the EY controversy. The Union Minister of State for Labour, Shobha Karanjale, has said that Labour Ministry has taken up the complaint and is investigating claims.
Tragic news came in this week where Anna Sebastian Perel, 26-year-old chartered accountant who worked at EY's Pune office, has been reported to be dead. But of course, she passed away back in July. The news is coming out now primarily because Anna Sebastian's mother, Anita Augustine, has written a very moving letter to Rajiv Memani, the chairman of EY India. In the letter, Anita Augustine points out that her daughter was put through severe work stress at EY's Pune office, specifically due to unending work hours as well as unrealistic expectations from a new chartered accountant who was entering such a large consultancy firm. According to the mother of the deceased, the direct result of all of these work pressures was the death of Anna Sebastian. Now, of course, EY has released a statement defending itself in a way, but also saying that it is in the process of implementing new measures to try and improve the quality of the workplace, and that it will dedicate itself to create a more safe working environment for its over 1 lakh employees. But having said that, remember that these actions are coming nearly 2 months after Anna's death and are only coming in because Anna's mother has written this letter to Rajiv Memani.
Thank you very much, Vishy, for joining us on that. In fact, that's all we have time for right now on Profit 360. Thank you very much for joining us.